desire to bring killers to justice. And when he does that, there's a very good chance there'll be peace.
You can see more of Jamie Gangel's exchange with the president and a look at the day in the life of Homeland Security Chief Tom Ridge tomorrow morning on Today.
The president dismisses it as a relic. But even after 4 summit meetings, he couldn't convince President Putin to see it his way. Grim-faced, today the president served notice that the U.S. will abandon the 30-year-old ABM treaty because he says it stands in the way of his goal to deploy a national missile defense shield, something that has become vital, Bush told the Russians today, since the September 11th attacks.
The terrorists and some of those who support them seek the ability to deliver death and destruction to our doorstep via missile.
By serving 6 months' notice today, the United States by next summer will be able to more aggressively test a limited missile defense system that experts agree is still many years from deployment. In Moscow today, President Putin's reaction was muted. Knowing Bush's announcement was coming, he called the U.S. withdrawal a mistake, but vowed it won't undermine U.S.-Russian relations. Of bigger concern to some critics, China, which has threatened to beef up its nuclear arsenal should the U.S. pursue a missile defense.
It has the overwhelming potential to start a genuine arms race in Asia, so that instead of China having less than 24 ICBMs facing me and my children, my grandchildren may have 200, 300, 500 facing them.
And on that point today, the president reached out to China's leader to assure him that the U.S. plan should not be considered a threat. It's the same message the president hopes to send to Russia before long with a new treaty that calls for a sharp reduction in offensive nuclear warheads on both sides. Tom?
Thanks very much. NBC's David Gregory at the White House tonight. Up next, new numbers on
comfort in that.
Forces and Afghan troops close in for what may be the final battle. Tale of the tape. Just who is the mystery man in the bin Laden video? And could this tape actually help the so-called 20th hijacker in custody in America? In depth, danger in the sky, disturbing new information tonight about the 9/11 hijackings, widespread panic in the air traffic system, the story behind the shutdown. And home of the brave. 57 years ago, he fought his way up the beaches of Normandy. Now he's enlisting again. What this old soldier can teach America's warriors of today.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. Tonight in Afghanistan, bombs, rockets, planes, and heavily armed warriors from the United States and its tribal allies are aiming at a complex of caves in the Tora Bora Mountains where they believe that Osama bin Laden is preparing for his last stand. Bin Laden is believed to be trapped in a very small area, no more than 2 miles in diameter, possibly moving from cave to cave over the ridge of the White Mountains, where the altitude can be as high as 12 or 13,000 feet. It is tricky and treacherous terrain, but President Bush said today, quote, "We're going to get him." NBC's Jim Abala is in that area tonight as well. He has the latest for us.
He sits on a mountaintop directing a pitched battle against a dwindling and desperate al-Qaeda. Over the radio, Afghan warlord Hazrat Ali, leader of the Eastern Alliance, receives critical word from his men. They've surrounded a cave they believe is the personal hideaway of Osama bin Laden. The Pentagon will only say they believe bin Laden is cornered. Commander Ali says the search could end as early as tomorrow, expecting a final battle this weekend, face-to-face with the now 200 surviving al-Qaeda fighters. The Afghans supported in their assault by United States Special Forces, like these Americans hiding from cameras in a rebel pickup truck on the way to the front.
We're still falling.
The darkest day in aviation history. Today we learned that managers at the FAA's National Command Center thought briefly it was something even worse.
We learned that morning it looked for a while as though instead of 4 planes hijacked, there might have been more than a dozen. The story, about to be published by the magazine Aviation Week and Space Technology, and confirmed now by others, explains the rush to suddenly clear the skies of all other planes.
At the command center, managers reeling from the shock of the first two planes slamming into the World Trade Center, frantically polled outlying centers and discovered 11 other planes unaccounted for, either off course, out of communication, or off radar. Aviation Week's David Bond.
2 planes have crashed into the World Trade Center. You know there is a conspiracy. It's something that you've never imagined in your life, probably. You're thinking, how many of these planes are part of it? How much of this stuff is left?
Then a radio transmission from one of those planes, a hijacker.
Well, it sounded like someone said they have a bomb on board. United 93, understand they have a bomb on board? Go ahead. Executive 956, did you understand that transmission? Affirmative, he said there was a bomb on board.
At the command center, the decision is made for an unprecedented, immediate grounding of all 4,500 planes flying in the U.S. that morning. Tracked by the command center, it was accomplished within 2 hours, even grounding the president's father, former President Bush, on a flight forced to land in Milwaukee. The Controllers Union's John Carr.
There's no margin for error. It had never been practiced before. It had never been conceived of before that we would have to land every aircraft in the National Airspace System.
By now, we know of the 11 planes controllers still agonized over after the Trade Center had been hit. Only 2 more were really hijacked. Turns out the other 9 were all innocent, explainable deviations from flight that might have been ignored on any other day. But on September 11th, nothing could be taken for granted. Robert Hager, NBC News, Washington.
Up next, the shocking downfall of the Enron Corporation. The executives made a
lot.
And if Russia's bid for oil influence succeeds...
Dot Wettstein and her granddaughter Kelly send a loved one overseas to join his comrades.
Jack has a wonderful personality. He can make you laugh if you're sad.
He's a very courageous man.
Only, this is no ordinary soldier. Dot's husband Jack, D-Day veteran, Purple Heart recipient. And for his 80th birthday, this grandfather got the best and most unexpected gift he's ever received. An invitation to visit the troops from his old infantry outfit, now keeping the peace in war-torn Bosnia.
I cried to be honored to go way far away to Bosnia.
So once again, almost 60 years after his first trip overseas, Jack's loved ones say so long so he can serve his country one more time.
It was almost like going back to war again, you know, you leave your family.
In Bosnia, Jack is reunited with other veterans from his 29th Infantry Division. He tours what's left of the countryside. The last time Jack was with a military outfit in Europe, he fought for his life and his country.
A terrible experience. Everybody was scared. You can't believe how scared you are. But we made it.
This time, Jack hopes to boost the morale of these young peacekeepers and to show these troops the wisdom of a veteran who's been there, done that.
They were so appreciative that we came over, especially a D-Day veteran. Those boys talk about my grandfather was in the war. And that makes me feel low. They took a picture of all us here.
Another successful tour of duty completed, Jack comes home. This time not to start anew, but to enjoy the life he earned for himself long ago on the beaches of Normandy.
At 80 years old, he has a lot of wisdom, a lot to offer.
The wisdom that America can prevail. Now needed more than ever as his country fights a different kind of war in Afghanistan.
There's no other country got a fighting force like that. We're going to win.
Jack Wettstein.
Got it.
Living proof of what America has and can overcome.
I know we're going to survive. If I was young, I'd go right back into war with them.
That's a view that we can use at this time. That's Nightly News for this Friday night. Don't forget Dateline tonight at 9, 8 Central. New details about John Walker Lynn, the young American fighting with the Taliban. I'm Tom Brokaw.
Seen fighters built
in New York. This is NBC Nightly News, reported by John Siegenthaler.
Good evening, everyone. The last of the Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters appear to be cornered, and tonight, U.S. officials still believe Osama bin Laden is with them. As American jets continue to pound the area, there were new reports that al-Qaeda forces were ready to surrender. We begin our coverage in the Tora Bora Mountains, the focus of the search for bin Laden. Here's NBC's Jim Avila.
Huge fireballs erupted today directly over the Tora Bora caves, hiding the final remnants of the Al-Qaeda and possibly their leader, Osama bin Laden. On the ground, anti-Taliban tribal fighters pushed to the front, holding their positions, sealing off escape from the mountains. Afghans listening to Al-Qaeda radio traffic on portable scanners say Arab and Chechen fighters could be heard arguing amongst themselves about surrender. 50 trapped bin Laden followers gave up overnight and are being questioned by U.S. intelligence forces. Anti-Taliban warlords leading the ground attack and supported by U.S. and British special forces say the remaining Al-Qaeda are cornered and desperate, promising but failing to surrender.
Nobody has surrendered?
This commander says small groups are trying to escape by mule over the mountains to Pakistan, while their leaders beg for ceasefires to stall any final attacks, a tactic that may be working. The anti-Taliban tribal fighters made no advances today on the cave holding the remaining 150 to 200 Al-Qaeda and possibly bin Laden himself. Limited ground fighting, but American bombers continue to pound the ridgeline, hoping to prevent any kind of escape to Pakistan during surrender talks. The Afghan warlords say they believe bin Laden is still here, just 500 yards from their front lines. But the last time any of the fighters report seeing him, or Americans report hearing him delivering orders on radios, was a week ago. The Pentagon believes bin Laden is cornered here because of the ferocity of the Al-Qaeda defense, and because there's no solid evidence he is anywhere else. But tonight, the leading question remains, as posed by Commander Hazrat Ali, where is the big guy? In the end, the answer could be not here. Jim Avila, NBC News, Tora Bora, Afghanistan.
With the Taliban in disarray, U.S. troops are now settling in Kandahar, the Taliban's spiritual base. NBC's Suzanne Malveaux joins us now from the Pentagon with more. Suzanne?
Well, good evening. As the battle against al-Qaeda continues, the Pentagon is already preparing for the next phase of this war. Marines well on their way to establishing a large American base in southern Afghanistan's major city.
Not the sound of enemy fire, but U.S. Marines blowing up Taliban munitions left behind.
Rockets, projectiles, fuses, missiles.
American troops are now occupying Kandahar's airport, collecting and destroying hundreds of weapons, clearing the way for the bulk of the U.S. Marine contingent to move in.
The situation in Kandahar is still somewhat unsettled, but the airport now is under the control of the U.S. Marines.
Hundreds of Marine ground and air assault teams based 65 miles away will travel to Kandahar. Under the cover of darkness, they prepare for their transfer north. Hundreds of al-Qaeda captives will also be moved here once a prison is built. There are no illusions that even after the fighting stops, the dangers will be over.
There's a certain element of risk to everything we're doing, not only the environmental conditions, but I think we're now down to sorting out the really bad guys.
This is where the Marines will patrol next, the streets of Kandahar, the spiritual home of the Taliban.
Now, even as U.S. forces prepare to enter the airport in Kandahar, Pentagon officials emphasizing tonight that they will not stay long as an occupying force inside of Afghanistan. John?
NBC's Suzanne Malveaux at the Pentagon. Suzanne, thank you.
Sure.
In Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, U.S. forces have already extended their influence, but what that means in the long run and the issue of security throughout the country remain open questions. NBC's Jim Maseda has our report.
In the heart of Kabul, U.S. Marines reclaim a strip of America. The U.S. Embassy, closed since 1989, will reopen soon. A new era in U.S.-Afghan relations. But these Marines are tense. Bullets zing overhead at night.
At any given time, there could possibly be a threat. And so we always remain vigilant, on guard, and ever watchful.
But despite pockets of Taliban resistance, most Afghans feel the war is over. Now they hope for better lives, a nation at peace. But that's cause for worry, too. We must get many heavily armed peacekeepers in here, says Abdul Wahid. It's the only way to disarm all the militias who have brought such misery. NATO countries like Great Britain, with a small number of troops already on the ground and likely to lead any peacekeeping force, say up to 10,000 soldiers may be needed to provide security and protect the new interim government. Not so, says Hamid Karzai, the next prime minister who assumes power next week. In a controversial move, his government has called for a much smaller international contingent, no more than 1,000, and has rejected the use of force by peacekeepers, claiming Afghans can protect themselves. But this is a nation that has known only conflict for over 20 years. Analysts say that keeping the peace here with warlords and private armies and an ongoing war on terrorism will be a difficult and dangerous mission.
Getting rid of the Taliban is the easy part of this assignment.
The hard part?
Finding alternative employment for people who only know how to fight.
Tonight, Kabul marked the end of the holy month of Ramadan, typically by firing an arsenal of weapons. A joyous moment, but also a sign of the dangers ahead. Jim Masadam, NBC News, Kabul.
Now to the so-called American Taliban. 20-year-old John Walker is being held aboard a U.S. Navy ship in the North Arabian Sea tonight, being treated for the gunshot wound he suffered during the prison uprising in which a CIA agent was killed. As the U.S. government weighs charging Walker with treason, his mother continues to insist that he was brainwashed. More on the transformation from NBC's Josh Mankiewicz.
2 weeks after we first saw him, dazed and dirty, flushed from a prison tunnel after a bloody battle in which he and the United States were on opposite sides, Americans are still asking how John Philip Walker Lind, a young man raised in an affluent suburb of San Francisco, came to be fighting in Afghanistan for the Taliban. John Walker's journey to Afghanistan began more than 7,000 miles away here in Marin County, California. He is remembered here as a quiet boy, that is, when he's remembered at all.
From the beginning, you could tell he was a person who was pretty dedicated to Islam.
Abdullah Nana is one of the few people who knew John Walker well. They met at the local Islamic center when John officially converted.
He was telling me that Islam came to me like as a solution, as the way out. He was looking for somewhere where he could devote himself and apply himself in.
John began to study the Quran, trying to commit each of its more than 6,600 sentences to memory, one of the marks of a devout Muslim. At age 16, John Lind faded into the past to be replaced by Suleiman, Arabic for Solomon. His spiritual metamorphosis brought about a change in his appearance, and he announced his desire to go to Yemen to study Arabic. His friends at the Islamic Center thought Suleiman was making the wrong choice. But Suleiman al-Lind wasn't swayed, and then last November his spiritual quest took him to a remote corner of Pakistan. As the only adult studying at a children's school, the locals welcomed Suleiman, but in this American journeyman, they may have seen a potential asset.
There also would be the urgent demand for soldiers, the urgent demand for jihadis. The mosque students are a major target, and I would assume that it was being there that took him that second step.
This is a part of the Arab world where Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda organization is known to recruit new soldiers just out of school. It was his choice to accept Islam.
Yes.
And it was his choice to go to Yemen.
Yes.
And now his parents are arguing that he ended up with the Taliban because he was brainwashed. Yeah. Does that make sense to you?
During the time I knew him, I didn't know him to be a pretty independent person who could think for himself. But at the same time, those people who accept Islam, the new converts to Islam, they tend to be more influenced by the people they meet and the Muslims they come into contact with.
Was John Lind brainwashed, or was it his choice? The FBI is asking those same questions. Josh Mankiewicz, NBC News, San Francisco.
Here in New York City today, a milestone at Ground Zero when the largest standing piece of the World Trade Center came down. The 50-foot section of the facade from the North Tower was pulled down by construction crews. The North Tower was the first to be hit. The facade will be saved along with a huge chunk of the steel from the South Tower for a possible memorial at the site where more than 3,000 people were killed. The war on terror and the nation's legislative agenda are topics tomorrow on NBC's Meet the Press. Secretaries, before September 11th, one of the hijackers may have been considering chemical tanks as a target. In association with the Washington Post, here's NBC's Virginia Cha.
Plants found in cities and towns all over the country, many storing or processing substances which, if released into the air, could produce toxic clouds. The Washington Post cites an EPA study which says that 123 plants could each put more than 1 million people at risk, and that 700 others could each put 100,000 in danger. The threat so urgent, chemical facilities were among the first to be shown lists of suspected terrorists by the FBI following the 9/11 attacks. According to the Post article, just last March, a man believed to be Mohammed Atta, the suspected ringleader of the World Trade Center attack, flew into a small airport in eastern Tennessee and asked what chemicals were in the massive storage tanks of a local company. But foreign terrorism is not the only concern. 2 years ago, federal authorities charged 2 alleged militiamen with plotting to blow up 2 propane storage tanks in suburban Sacramento. The chemical industry says companies have tightened security at its plants since September 11th, including increasing ID checks, adding guards and cameras, fixing broken fencing. But critics say that's not enough.
Unfortunately, it's true that that terrorists could render any of these facilities or transport of toxic chemicals a disaster without ever penetrating security.
5 years ago, Greenpeace shot this undercover video after sneaking into a chemical plant in Louisiana to show how easy it was to gain access back in 1996, when preventing leaks was a higher priority than preventing a terror attack. A spokesman for the chemical industry says more security measures will be taken after specific needs are assessed. An interim Department of Justice report on how to assess chemical plant vulnerability is expected next week. Virginia Cha, NBC News, New York.
The war on terrorism is complicated by worsening regional situations overseas, not readily subject to U.S. control. Exhibit A, the Middle East, scene of more rocket attacks tonight. Exhibit B, India and Pakistan. NBC's John Palmer has our report.
Israeli forces hunting Palestinian militants charged into 2 sections of the Gaza Strip today. 5 Palestinians were killed, dozens injured. The continuing violence prompted the Bush administration to suspend its attempt to broker a ceasefire. U.S. envoy Anthony Zinni, who met today with Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, was called home for consultations.
Those against?
Overnight, the United States vetoed a Palestinian-backed UN resolution urging an end to the violence, saying the measure was aimed at isolating Israel. It was another U.S. action that angered Palestinians, as well as some Arab leaders whose support the U.S. wants in the coalition against international terrorism.
The Arab countries link progress on the Israeli-Palestinian dispute to their support of the war on terrorism. We may not like that linkage, but in fact they do.
Another dispute that complicates the anti-terrorism coalition, the border conflict over Kashmir between India and Pakistan. Earlier this week, terrorists who support independence for Kashmir carried out a suicide attack on India's parliament. 12 people died. Today, India's Prime Minister Vajpayee said India has reached the limit of its tolerance, suggesting that Pakistan supported the attackers. Pakistan was quick to reply.
So I would like to warn against any precipitate action by the Indian government against Pakistan.
Both India and Pakistan have tested nuclear weapons, escalating the stakes in any all-out conflict. All this leaves the United States in a balancing act, trying to keep Pakistan and India's long-standing animosity from disrupting the coalition. But in the Middle East, the United States has clearly sided with Israel at the risk of weakening Arab support for the international war against terrorism. John Palmer, NBC News at the White House.
The music industry is more...
Old van bomb to go off in this city.
Most senior U.S. official to arrive in Afghanistan. Rumsfeld's first order of business to meet with Hamid Karzai, the opposition leader who next week will take over the interim Afghan government.
The 2 leaders met here at Bagram Airfield, heavily fortified with hundreds of U.S. forces. Rumsfeld said the face-to-face meeting was designed to make sure they were on the same wavelength about what to do next here in Afghanistan.
Rumsfeld rallied U.S. troops on the front lines here and reminded them
there's no way to know how long it's going to take to find Omar and to find Osama bin Laden and to find the senior al-Qaeda leadership and to see that they're punished. But as far as our presence here, we're not leaving till we get the job done.
Rumsfeld also met with troops from the 10th Mountain Division at a base outside Afghanistan, where he said U.S. warplanes hit pay dirt. One cave complex in Tora Bora so filled with ammunition, it left a plume of smoke visible for miles.
which suggests that they were doing much more than baking cookies in there.
The troops were glad Rumsfeld had visited them.
Anytime that soldiers lose focus or anything of that nature, we just replay the events of September 11th, and that gives us even more energy.
Aboard the C-17 plane Rumsfeld traveled on to the bases, he said hundreds of al-Qaeda have been killed and claimed one senior leader has been captured. Thousands are still hiding, and that he is still not worried that bin Laden has not yet been caught. Nora O'Donnell, NBC News, with Secretary Rumsfeld in Afghanistan.
Even with a lull in the ground war, Afghanistan remains a dangerous place. 3 U.S. Marines assigned to secure the airport in Kandahar, the Taliban's spiritual base, were wounded today in a landmine explosion. NBC's Rob Morrison has our report.
The Marines were passing through a minefield that had already been swept. On their way to conduct building clearing operations, the 3 Marines, one seriously injured, 2 slightly, were flown south to Camp Rhino by helicopter, Rhino having superior medical facilities.
Today's incident underscores the ever-present danger landmines present to these Marines. The area between the 2 fences you see behind me is a minefield that surrounds this airport on 3 sides.
Some of the minefields here are marked, others are not. Some date back to the Soviet invasion 20 years ago. Many Russian weapons have been left behind as well. This cache was collected and destroyed today. Marines say they appear to have been abandoned in a hurry. Everything left out in the open and scattered on the floor. These in a hospital pavilion.
Any sort of ordnance you could imagine on a battlefield, we have found it here.
Meantime, progress is being made on opening the airport. Last night, for the first time, 6 Marine C-130s landed on the damaged runway. Local contractors are being hired to help fix the runway, and once larger cargo planes can land, humanitarian aid to the region can begin. With the U.S. Marines in southern Afghanistan, I'm Rob Morrison.
And when NBC Nightly News continues, delays in the anthrax cleanup on Capitol Hill. Ending the violence. NBC's Martin Fletcher has our report. NBC's Martin Fletcher has our report.
Finally, Yasser Arafat caved in. After intense U.S. and Israeli pressure, Arafat today, in a rare address to his people, told them, stop all attacks against Israelis. No more suicide bombs. No more mortar attacks against Jewish settlements. We will punish anyone who does not obey, he said. To back up his words, Arafat sent his police overnight to start closing down offices of Islamic militant groups Hamas and Islamic Jihad. They've carried out most of the suicide attacks against Israelis. Arafat has always condemned the suicide bombers, but Israel said he never stopped them. And Israel quickly pointed out this isn't the first ceasefire Arafat's called for. He never meant it, they said, and the fighting only got worse.
Start doing what you promised when you declared the first ceasefire on September, 18th of September. Since then, we buried 67 people and 500 more were wounded.
But some in Yasser Arafat's own group, Fatah, immediately challenged him. They agreed tonight not to attack Israelis inside Israel proper, but they also warned the Jewish settlers and soldiers on the West Bank and in Gaza are still targets. Palestinian fighters are in no mood to compromise, burying their dead today after a weekend of Israel's toughest raids on Palestinian villages in years. 13 Palestinians killed, dozens wounded, more than 50 arrested. What they want now is revenge, and it isn't clear yet if they will obey their leader. But there were peaceful moments here today. Yasser Arafat marking the end of Ramadan. Also today, Israel's foreign minister celebrating Hanukkah. And everywhere, the hope that Arafat's call to stop the violence and to resume peace talks will be heard by both sides. Martin Fletcher, NBC News, Tel Aviv.
When NBC Nightly News continues.
U.S. Special Forces.
A peaceful transfer of power in Afghanistan, the first in almost 3 decades. The new leader makes a simple plea.
We basically need, billions of dollars.
And indications of a last-minute buying binge, with markdowns making a difference.
There's lots of bargains out there for consumers, so get out there and shop.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News, reported by John Siegenthaler.
Good evening, everyone. A disturbing incident on board an American Airlines jet this afternoon. Officials say a flight attendant discovered a passenger carrying a bomb on the jumbo jet, American Airlines Flight 63, which was en route from Paris to Miami, and suddenly diverted the plane to Boston's Logan Airport. NBC's Dan Abrams is following the story.
As you can see, this is really only moments after this incident happened in the air. There were 185 passengers on board this American Flight 65, 12 crew members. It was initially en route from Paris to Miami, but it was diverted to Boston after a flight attendant saw someone light a match in the air. Here's what someone from the airport had to say today.
We're told the flight attendants became alerted to a smell of sulfur, which is a match, and immediately took action when they saw what this individual was attempting to do, and literally tackled the individual and get into a wrestling match in an attempt to subdue and stop this action. And apparently were successful in doing that. And other passengers joined in to subdue this individual and was ultimately strapped and belted into the row 29 of the aircraft, and was sedated by two doctors on board 3 different times en route to Boston.
Now, no one was injured, but you see here, this is a flight attendant who was treated for a bite wound on board. The man was actually traveling with a phony British passport, apparently 6'4". So a lot of those flight attendants, as well as the people on board, had a lot of work to do to sedate him. John?
NBC's Dan Abrams. Dan, thank you very much. Now to Afghanistan, where today the new prime minister was sworn in, offering this country ravaged by war new hope. NBC's Chip Reed reports.
In a room of hardened warriors, eyes filled with tears at the sound of Afghanistan's national anthem.
After years of bitter war and conflict, power is being transferred from one administration to another, not under the fire of guns, but peacefully.
The nation's new leader, Hamid Karzai, sworn in during a prayer-filled ceremony. His cabinet of 29 members, a cross-section of Afghanistan's ethnic groups, and 2 women, one a deputy prime minister. It will be a long journey, Karzai told his audience, and he said, I am a novice, I need your help. But he will need much more than that. With Afghanistan in ruins after decades of war, Karzai says it will need billions in foreign aid over many years.
There is really no area in which Afghanistan will not require assistance.
Security is also a danger. Heavily armed fighters still roam the streets. An international peacekeeping force of more than 3,000 is expected here soon, but today only a few dozen British Marines were on patrol. In Kabul today, people gathered around televisions, wherever they could find them, to see history being made. This man says, we're very happy to have a new government. Let them bring peace and freedom. But now, Karzai says, there is another risk, high expectations.
If we deliver to the Afghan people what we promised, this will be a great day. If we don't deliver, this will go into oblivion.
Despite the momentous challenges, for the first time in years, the mood here in Afghanistan is one of hope. Chip Reed, NBC News, Kabul.
And just who is this man carrying the burden of hope for peace in Afghanistan? NBC's chief diplomatic correspondent, Andrea Mitchell, on the thoughts and background of Hamid Karzai.
Afghanistan's new interim leader, just days ago in Rome, receiving the political blessing of the country's 87-year-old former king.
I hope all Afghans will see to it that revenge is forgotten, that we become compassionate, that we become kind, but just.
Last weekend in Afghanistan with an even more important patron.
He is anxious to be cooperative with us in every possible way, and he's very pleased and appreciative of everything.
Under pressure from the U.S., Karzai was a compromise choice acceptable to feuding tribal leaders. a role he's been preparing for all his life. 44 years old, he is the fourth of 7 sons of an Afghan politician assassinated while exiled in Pakistan. His younger brother says Hamid never considered joining the rest of the family in the United States.
We encouraged him to come here and make a life for himself, but he refused to do that. He said he wants to stay with his people.
But he has worked closely with the American military and intelligence during the fight against the Taliban. So closely, he was slightly injured in a friendly fire incident that killed 3 Americans and several Afghan fighters, only reinforcing his determination to establish order.
We have to create an Afghanistan in which all people live under the rule of law, and that warlordism and gun running must end.
But after 2 decades of war, is he tough enough to control the rival Afghan factions and also withstand attacks from renegade Taliban seeking revenge?
He's got to move fast, he's got to move quickly, strongly, clearly, and if he fluffs this or messes it up, he'll be out. It's like riding the tiger. He's either on the back of the tiger or in his stomach, and Afghan politics is really like that.
Karzai's greatest leverage, money, international aid for reconstruction to give his people a better life. Karzai has welcomed international peacekeepers and promised something Afghanistan has never really experienced, a political process leading to democratic rule. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Washington.
While Afghan politics took a clear step forward today, the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden remained unclear. And now there are questions about a U.S. airstrike against al-Qaeda forces on Thursday. NBC's Nora O'Donnell joins us from the Pentagon tonight. Nora?
Good evening, John. There has been a pause in the bombing for nearly a week, except for a convoy struck 2 days ago. Tonight, U.S. officials are confident they killed Taliban leaders, claims disputed by local Afghan villagers. The damage in an eastern Afghanistan village was visible for the first time today after Thursday's airstrike. A dozen trucks destroyed, nearby buildings flattened, dozens reportedly killed. This villager claims the U.S. made a mistake and hit friendly tribal leaders on their way to Kabul to celebrate the inauguration of the new government. But today, the commanding U.S. general said he's confident it was Taliban leadership on the run.
The indications that I have right now tell me that this was a target that we intended to strike.
Franks claims the convoy launched 2 shoulder-fired surface-to-air weapons at the attack planes overhead. In fact, U.S. military officials tell NBC News U.S. Special Forces have been operating in that area searching for Osama bin Laden. But today, General Franks told NBC News there have been no reported sightings, and he repeated that bin Laden's fate is unknown.
It's possible for bin Laden to still be someplace in Afghanistan. I think it's possible that he can be dead. I think it's possible that he may have moved across into Pakistan.
Today, Pakistan's president, appearing on Chinese TV, echoed the uncertainty about bin Laden.
He's not in Pakistan. That we are reasonably sure, but we can't be 100% sure.
Today, U.S. warplanes prowled the skies, hunting for fleeing enemy forces, but no bombs were dropped. While in Kandahar, hundreds of U.S. Marines are on standby, waiting for their orders to head to the caves of Tora Bora to search for bin Laden. Tonight, U.S. military officials say they may wait till after Christmas before sending more U.S. Marines to join the hunt for bin Laden. John?
NBC's Nora O'Donnell at the Pentagon. Nora, thank you. Now, America's attempt to recover from the 9/11 terror attacks is the topic tomorrow on NBC's Meet the Press. Mercy to help the refugees in Afghanistan. NBC's Jim Macedo reports.
He calls it a gift from God, a sack of flour. It's not much, but for Abdul Mumin and his family, it's the difference between life and death. They are among some 1,500 Afghan refugees facing winter in this dusty strip with almost no food or protection from the elements. Hunger and disease have already killed dozens of refugees here, including children, among them one of Abdul Mumin's sons. I looked for food for 10 days and found none, he says. One of my sons just starved to death.
That ain't going to happen on our watch, right, Jim?
But a small group of American aid workers stumbled on the camp.
Teshakur, America, good?
Ed Artist is a former medic from Los Angeles, and Jim Laws, a cardiologist back in Dayton. When they saw this, they knew they'd found their latest mission.
We're just putting a Band-Aid on hemorrhage. But somebody's got to start with a Band-Aid.
Sir Edward and Sir James are in fact Knights of Malta, a chivalrous order of Christian crusaders in days of old, but today they say they're just plain do-gooders, bringing help to the needy and now Muslims in Afghanistan.
We're ambassadors at large for the good parts about America.
Finding private donors on the internet, they've scraped together $100,000, much of it from their own pockets. Delivering 4 truckloads of food, blankets, and tents. In all, some 60 tons of food should get these people through the winter, but the Americans, who are all Vietnam War vets, they have no illusions about how long this war on terror will last, and that these people will need help for years. Why do they do it?
It's a kick in the head, man. I love it. But what we can do is feed a few of these kids. This right here, that's who we work for.
Abdul Mumin, who had never even seen an American, is grateful to them. His new tent is warm and strong. Now he says he may never have to bury yet another child. Jim Masada, NBC News, Northern Afghanistan.
And updating our top story tonight, an American Airlines jumbo jet en route from Paris to Miami was diverted to Boston after a passenger apparently tried to ignite some sort of explosive device in his shoe. A flight attendant and other passengers subdued the man. She approached him because she smelled sulfur. The suspect also reportedly carried a newly issued British passport, which appeared to be a forgery. The investigation is continuing, but all who were aboard the flight, American Airlines Flight 63, are safe. And that is NBC Nightly News for this Saturday. Thanks for watching. I'm John Siegenthaler in New York, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow night.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News, reported by John Siegenthaler.
Good evening, everyone. We're learning new information about the dramatic struggle on board an American Airlines jet where passengers and crew members fought to subdue a man they believed was trying to detonate a bomb. The suspect, who uses numerous names, is identified as Richard Reed. According to the FBI, preliminary tests have determined that there were 2 functional explosive devices in his sneakers. Passengers on the flight from Paris to Miami described the frightening experience thousands of feet over the Atlantic. NBC's Virginia Cha joins us from Boston's Logan Airport tonight, where the plane landed last night. Virginia?
John, as the incident unfolded, authorities say Richard Reed struggled with 2 flight attendants, pushing one to the floor before finally being overpowered.
The man in back, at the center of an intense investigation by the FBI. Witnesses on the plane say he was lighting matches, trying to set something on fire. A flight attendant confronted him.
I just heard the flight attendant screaming for help, and I got up to see what was going on, and then some other guys came up and started like pushing him down and trying to take, I guess it was matches from his hand.
One person pulled his hair from behind, the stewardess jumped on top of him. People just around him had just swarmed around the seat and jumped on top of him to subdue him and control him. And it was all very, very quick.
Witnesses say he fought back, biting this flight attendant's hand before finally being subdued and restrained.
I think the stewardess at one point said, "Pass belts forward," and people sort of from the back of the cabin who'd really seen what had happened were taking off belts. We were all passing them forward, and they were tying up they were tying him up with these belts.
Once passengers were safely at the terminal, the bomb squad boarded the American Airlines plane to retrieve the shoe. Following the Boston incident, security at many airports now tighter. At Seattle, Tacoma, and Washington, and here at Logan, shoes were being inspected today. Richard Reed is being held at a county correctional facility about an hour south of Boston. Flight 63 passengers finally reached Miami this morning.
I feel like extremely lucky, and it was so close. I mean, if that flight attendant wouldn't have been walking down that aisle at that moment, I don't know what else what would have happened. So.
And NBC News has learned tonight that the FAA is issuing a new security directive to all airlines, ordering them to take extra specific security precautions. John?
NBC's Virginia Cha at Boston's Logan Airport, thank you. And at the Paris airport, where Flight 63 originated, authorities are having trouble explaining why Reed was permitted to board. Here's NBC's Jim Masada.
Today, French authorities, embarrassed by the potential terrorist attack, have launched an investigation. So far, they have few answers. It's hard to explain a number of things, says Air Police Chief Patrick Doobie. Why, for instance, was passenger Richard Reed questioned on Friday when he reportedly tried but failed to make the same flight, but not on Saturday when he appeared again?
It does look as if, though we're not sure yet, there were reasons why that should have been done in this case, and it wasn't.
Despite tight security at Charles de Gaulle International Airport, Reed, traveling on a British passport, cleared all the routine checks before boarding American Airlines Flight 63. And passengers wonder, how could someone carrying explosives in a shoe not be detected?
It's kind of scary. You know, you would hope that security be a little better.
And such a breach could happen anywhere else in Europe where police rarely check European passports and standard security equipment like metal detectors don't detect most explosive materials. Bomb-sniffing dogs were on duty in Paris, but French police say they were not called in since Reed aroused no suspicion. And experts say that only in Israel, with aggressive questioning or profiling of passengers, is security high enough to have prevented the Flight 63 incident.
We ought to be doing now. It would probably catch out somebody like this guy.
But others say that would be too abusive of passengers' rights of privacy. The French propose more dog teams and more vigilance, but admit that even then, terrorists could still slip through the net. Jim Masada, NBC News, London.
That's been happening.
It was the courageous actions of Flight 63 passengers which prevented disaster. And as NBC's Frederica Whitfield reports, a pro athlete was one of them.
I heard a female voice screaming, I need some help, I need some help.
Kwame James, a 6'8" member of the French national basketball team, was one of a half-dozen passengers who struggled to pin Reed down, eventually strapping him into his seat with their own belts.
My flight attendant said, you know, we need help. So I ran back there, started wrestling him also, helped subdue him and stuff, and he was still fighting back.
After 2 doctors on board sedated Reed with repeated injections of Valium, the men who had restrained him took turns guarding him. As the plane headed to Boston, escorted by U.S. Air Force fighters, the passengers were entertained by a movie, Legally Blonde.
Whereabouts and fate remain unknown, but tough times lie ahead. NBC's Ned Colt has our report.
The first day of work for Afghanistan's new government, and Interim Prime Minister Hamid Karzai is smiling, but he and his cabinet face potentially overwhelming challenges ahead. Challenges such as women's rights. This woman removes her burqa for the first time in public, but says that alone won't make women free here. They need work. Karzai says that's a priority, and he's also working to restore a centralized government. That means an end to a tribal warlord system that dates back centuries and allows those warlords to rule their own patch of turf without interference from the central government. This weekend, their followers were in the Tora Bora Mountains, looting al-Qaeda caves of arms and ammunition. While Afghanistan now has peace, prosperity may take a lot longer to attain. The World Bank and United Nations say this country needs almost $2 billion a year just to begin the rebuilding process. The wish list is endless. Schools where students have no desks and share tattered textbooks. A postal system all but shut down. This man postmarks letters that may never be delivered. 60,000 people in Jalalabad and only 200 phones. But there are no complaints. Shir Mohammed says the war against the Taliban has put him a month behind harvesting his radish crop. Some is rotting in the field. But he says people here are pleased that the fighting is finally over and that the future is looking brighter for all Afghans. After 23 years of war, one thing there's a surplus of is patience, as Afghanistan finds new direction. Ned Colt, NBC News, Jalalabad, Afghanistan.
And for leading his city through the horror which started the war on terror, New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani was named Time Magazine's Person of the Year. When NBC Nightly News continues.
Shudo, ABC News, the Pentagon.
Because it could undermine the U.S.-led war against al-Qaeda terrorists.
Along the border of India and Pakistan today, the ominous military buildup continues. Missiles put on alert and soldiers moving to the front. Leaders of both countries have their fingers on the trigger.
We do not want war, but war is being thrust upon us, and we will have to face it.
Before arriving at his ranch in Crawford today, the president again discussed the Indian-Pakistani escalation with members of his national security team. Secretary of State Powell, officials say, conducting some intensive telephone diplomacy with leaders in the region. While India and Pakistan have faced off for years over the disputed region of Kashmir, this threat of war follows the deadly December 13th attack on India's parliament. The attack, which killed 14, believed to be the work of two Muslim extremist groups operating in Pakistan. Today, in a show of support for India, the Bush administration froze the U.S. assets of those two groups, Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba, saying they are trying to destroy the peace between India and Pakistan. The U.S. is, however, working vigorously behind the scenes to defuse a conflict that could not only lead to a nuclear exchange, but greatly complicate the war on terrorism.
The danger is, as some people in Washington are afraid, is that we'll be so diverted by what happens in South Asia that we will not pursue the terrorists elsewhere in the world.
One major concern, U.S. officials warned that if Pakistan redeploys its infantry troops away from the Afghanistan border, the region near Tora Bora could become an escape route into Pakistan for any surviving al-Qaeda members.
And even as administration officials praise Pakistan for cracking down on Muslim terrorists since the attack on India's parliament, they also warned tonight that the situation remains very tense, saying it won't take much now to spark a war. Brian?
David Gregory at the Western White House in Texas. Thanks. Still ahead as we continue this night after Christmas, land of the free, a striking symbol of American heroism and bravery.
It's gorgeous.
For hundreds of miles along this rugged border, the tensions are as high as the mountaintops that surround it.
Glory left them crippled for life.
A sniper just shot him.
Palestinian kids, many not even teenagers, taking on the Israeli army with only rocks and rage. In 15 months of fighting here, 120 Palestinian children have been killed, all hailed as martyrs. But 450 have been left severely wounded, many shot in the head or neck, now condemned to life in a wheelchair. Like Yusuf, just 12 years old. Every day after school, he and his friends went straight to this Israeli army roadblock in Gaza, throwing stones at the soldiers, taunting them, playing at war. But one afternoon, Yusuf learnt the hard way. This is no game. In an instant, his life destroyed. An Israeli soldier shot him in the neck. Now paralyzed below the waist, his world confined to his bedroom, where his father says Yusuf passes the day just sleeping, praying, or staring at the wall.
I didn't expect this to happen to me. I am angry, but I have no regrets. This is God's will.
Yusuf liked to play soccer and hang out with his friends in the street. That's all over. Now, when Yusuf does get out, it's hard. Most streets are sand. School is more than a mile away. And in this desperately poor place, Yusuf needs the $150 the Palestinian government gives the war wounded as compensation. But there's a problem.
You took the check to the bank?
Oh, yes, there is no money.
6 out of 9 government checks bounce, so Yusuf and his father are on their own. Yusuf's dream is still to go to university, but first his immediate goal is to strengthen his arm muscles. All his workout equipment homemade. A devoted father helping a brave son. Was it worth it?
Yes, it is hard for me, but we have to make sacrifices for Palestine.
A sacrifice that will last a lifetime. Martin Fletcher, NBC News, Gaza.
Accidentally ended up where it should be. Exactly where it should be.
He's still here, still causing folks to stop and take notice. An unlikely memorial in the unlikeliest of places. Joanne Lloyd, visiting from North Carolina, wasn't sure what to think.
Said, look at that. What is that? It looks like a fireman. And we slowly came up to it, and it brings goosebumps back on your body.
When tragedy struck, this firefighter found himself in New York, some suggesting it was destiny. A 6-foot symbol originally headed for Missouri to honor their fallen brave. But in the wake of 9/11, the statue's manufacturer and Missouri's bravest insisted he stay put. We first told you about the statue shortly after he was parked on the corner of 8th Avenue and 44th Street. Since then, he's remained a guest of the Milford Plaza Hotel and its owners. Miguel Mercado works at the hotel. For 3 months now, he's had extra duties helping care for the memorial.
I'm proud to take care of the fire department staff and the police force too. I'm proud. I enjoy to do it.
The owners of the hotel say the statue can stay until the city can decide on a more permanent home. For now, it is a reminder of those who gave everything on September 11th. A reminder that hit home for the Pittmans. Ray, a visiting Florida firefighter, and his wife Maggie.
To see those guys go into that building, you know, we do it every day, and you don't even give it a second thought. And I know they had no idea that something like that was going to happen, and our heart, the entire fire department, our heart goes out to them.
It's gorgeous, it's beautiful, and it's quite a memorial.
A memorial, no matter where it stands, that will always recall the tragedy of an autumn day and the heroes who never made it home.
And that is NBC Nightly News for this Wednesday night after Christmas. I hope to see you later this evening for the news on MSNBC beginning at 8 and then on CNBC at...
Clearly, the security is only as strong as the weakest link we have.
And the plans to protect crowds for New Year's celebrations. The war on terror. The U.S. takes control of al-Qaeda prisoners, but will they talk? The brink of war. India and Pakistan massing their armies and no negotiations. And on the rebound, an upbeat outlook so far for the economy in 2002.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News, reported by John Siegenthaler.
Good evening, everyone. A new debate tonight over airport security. The federal government hoping they will provide new information that could lead to Osama bin Laden. NBC's Nora O'Donnell joins us from the Pentagon. Nora?
Good evening, John. Tonight, U.S. military officials said the number of prisoners brought under U.S. control has now more than doubled. Cramped inside this northern Afghan prison are thousands of Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters. They are heavily guarded by armed U.S. forces and interrogated. Those with useful intelligence are transferred to a secure base in Kandahar. Today, sources said more than 150 fighters are now in U.S. custody.
We're primarily looking at detainees that we can use for collecting intelligence. What we're doing inside, though, is we're searching them and we're medically screening them to see their state.
Concerned about an uprising, the prisoners are strip searched, then fingerprinted. Blood and hair samples taken for DNA records. With the detention center at Kandahar now nearly full, U.S. officials tell NBC News preparations are underway to transport prisoners to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where some could face U.S. military tribunals. Today, top Afghan officials reported plans for an international peacekeeping force in Afghanistan have now been finalized.
We are not at the end of the campaign. It should continue as long as it takes.
U.S. warplanes still prowl the skies, and today the first pictures of their latest airstrike in eastern Afghanistan, aimed at Taliban leadership. A large ammunition stockpile was found, and U.S. Special Forces were seen on the ground doing damage assessment. And tonight, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee said there is a high probability that Osama bin Laden is still alive. But the senator admits the trail has gone cold and the U.S. still does not know where bin Laden is hiding. John?
NBC's Nora O'Donnell at the Pentagon. Nora, thank you. Now to the threat of war between India and Pakistan. As tensions rise, both sides are sending more troops to the border with no negotiations in sight. NBC's Keith Miller reports from Islamabad.
Indian and Pakistani leaders were talking today, but not to each other. In New Delhi, the government met with all major political parties and got their support in the event of war. And India today renewed its call for Pakistan to crack down on terrorist organizations.
We are the aggrieved party before international community and not aggressive party.
In Pakistan, President Musharraf met with political leaders and warned India to back off.
If any war is thrust on Pakistan Armed Forces and the 140 million people of Pakistan are fully prepared to face all consequences with all their might.
Along the border, Pakistan moved troops and equipment into position to face off with an estimated 1 million Indian troops. The buildup of forces is the largest mobilization since these two countries last went to war in 1971. These nuclear powers, longtime enemies, continue to say they want peace.
Well, we're not asking for war. We are trying diplomacy, and we hope that diplomacy will succeed.
Pakistan stands for peace. Pakistan wants peace. Pakistan wants to reduce tension. Pakistan wants to de-escalate.
In some places, soldiers are less than 100 yards apart, and as the troops face off, all other contact is being curtailed. The last bus from Pakistan to India crossed the border today. On New Year's Day, all bus, rail, and air traffic will be canceled. And Israeli troops